Hey everybody, Mr. Wagstaff here. Alright, so today we're going to start talking about some monotheistic religions. Now, this stuff is cool. The story is absolutely wild. It is really important to understand the three monotheistic religions that exist today, which is Judaism, Islam, and Christianity, the three big players. We're going to need to talk about those really before we even get into the course, because there's so much conflict between these three religions. So today we're going to give you some background on these three religions, and I think that you're going to find this extremely interesting. So, even if you've grown up in the religious of one of those, Judaism, Islam, or Christianity, you might not be aware of how close the three religions actually are. So much so that those three religions, Judaism, Muslims, and Christianity, are referred to as the religions of the Abrahamic God. All right? Because Jewish people, Muslims, and Christians all worship the same God. Like, people may never have thought about that, but we're going to talk about the story today of how that works out. So even though, I mean, you're talking the Crusades, we'll talk about in this unit. You talk about fundamentalists with terrorism. You talk about the Holocaust. You talk about the horrific things that these religions have done to each other throughout time for the hatred of another group, yet all three of them are, at their core, peaceful religions who all follow a very peaceful God. And it's the same God. And I say that because you have to understand where it all began. And it all comes from this story of Abraham. Now, the story of Abraham makes it into history because the vast majority of the world population is one of those three religions, believes in the story of Abraham. So the story of Abraham took place thousands and thousands of years ago. However, there is no historical text outside of religious text that was passed down through an oral history that was eventually recorded. So the story of Abraham is a belief system. All right, not saying that it did not happen. All right, just saying that there are too many variables to validate. All right, this story 100% the way it is being presented here. However, the reason it is still part of world history is because decisions get made every day by religious groups based on their belief system that goes back to the story of Abraham, who is considered the father of these three religions. So, I want to tell you the story of Abraham today and start talking about these monotheistic religions, and I think you're going to be fascinated by it. All right. So here's the story of Abraham. So we're thousands of years ago, and there is this man named Abraham. To clarify, present day, Christians, Jews, Muslims all believe the story of Abraham. The story of Abraham is the starting point for all of these religions. So they all agree on this. There is one very particular part of the story near the end where these religions start disagreeing on the story and makes a pivotal difference in society. But let me tell you the story. So there's this guy of Abraham, all right? He lives in an area that is present day called Israel, all right? So give you a little, if I could zoom out, this would be in the Middle East. Israel is here at the time. This red line, I'm going to come back and mention all this land inside the red line here in a second. All right. So, Abraham's a dude, all right? He's a guy. One day, God comes to him and tells him to leave his land and go somewhere else and start a new civilization. And God is going to give Abraham all of this land for him to start a new civilization. So all of Abraham's descendants, all right, will then own that land from then on. And God has promised them this land. So this land promised to them by God. That land, we call it today, more or less, is that red line, but it's Israel. All right, so Israel is a huge piece of land that is promised to Abraham and his descendants. All right. So Abraham's like, sweet, I got all this awesome land. Here's the problem. Abraham doesn't have any kids, right? And especially no male heirs, right? Because you have to have a son in order to be able to leave all your land to. So, all right, fine. Well, he'll just go, he's married. His wife's name is Sarah. They'll go have a kid. Well, Abraham and Sarah are 86 years old when God comes and gives them this land. So, Abraham is like, uh-oh, that's not good. Like, we ain't having any kids. What are we going to do? So Sarah, who might be the most understanding woman in the history of any religion, I say that jokingly, Sarah goes to her husband, Abraham, and is like, look, I can't have any more kids, but you, since God has promised your descendants all this land, you need to have a child. So Sarah has a female servant who is much younger than her and says, hey, Abraham, you go have a baby with my servant. That way you have an heir to all this land. Sarah is much more understanding than I would have been. But this is what happens. So Abraham has a child at 86 years old with his wife's servant. All right. So this child is born. It is a son. His name is Ishmael. All right. So when Ishmael is born, they're like, hooray, we now have an heir for all this land. So when we die, Ishmael will inherit it and everything will be good. All right. Now, this is a drawing. Since it's, there's no photographs of them. So this is supposed to be Abraham and his wife, Sarah. All right. So they have Ishmael. This is great. Now, it's not technically a wife between Abraham and his wife like God wanted, or that Abraham assumes God wanted, but he has a son. All right. So Ishmael is considered to be the heir to everything that God has offered. All right. Then, I'm just going to tell you the story. Abraham and Sarah get older. Ishmael is 14 years old. All right. They are 100 years old. All right. Abraham and his wife are 100 years old. Ishmael is 14. Sarah, the 100-year-old wife, gets pregnant with Abraham's child. All right. I'm not drawing up no diagrams on how that's going to take place, but she gets pregnant at age 100, all right? And she gives birth to a boy. His name is Isaac, all right? So Isaac is now the baby. Ishmael is 14. Well, now the question becomes, because it always goes to the oldest heir, all right? Who is the rightful heir to all this land? Is it Isaac, who's a baby, all right? Or is it Ishmael, who is only, he's not really the son of both Sarah and Abraham. So who's going to inherit all this land? All right. This is where the story starts getting more interesting. So this is Abraham and his wife Sarah and baby Isaac. All right, and we answered this. So it was according to the religious text of all three major religions today, what was promised to Abraham by God. And we had discussed that already. So make sure you answer that in complete sentences. You can always pause this video if you need more time to answer those. Always just pause it, answer it, and then come back and start back. That's always going to, technology. All right. So, God, all right, is going to test the faith of Abraham to see if Abraham's really worthy of this. So, and I'm going to specifically be vague here because I'm going to tell you the story that everybody agrees on. All right. So God requires Abraham to take his son out to execute him. So he's like, hey, take your son out and execute him and prove to me that you are the rightful heir to all this land. All right. So Abraham takes his son out to execute him. All right. he takes him way out, and he's like, all right, God wants me to do this. So he puts his son down at a place to sacrifice him, raises a knife to kill him, and then God's like, whoa, just kidding. No, I don't actually want you to kill him. I just want to see if you would. So you were. That's all I wanted to see. Don't kill your son, because that son, that is who the heir to all of this land here in Israel, that's who gets it. All right. And Abraham's like, awesome. And him and his son go back home. All right. Now, I tell you that whole story to understand this. There's a disagreement between the religions over which son Abraham took to execute. Christians and Jews believe he took the baby. Now, this was about 5 years after, so Isaac would have been about 5 years old, taking the child out to execute him. And it's important to know which child got taken out to be executed, because the child that was taken to be executed is the child that gets promised everything from their descendants on, and the other child gets nothing. According to Christians and Jews and their understanding of this story, Abraham had taken Isaac, the young child, out, and therefore Isaac's descendants end up taking over all of Israel. Isaac, his descendants will end up founding Judaism, Jewish people, which would then be Christianity. Muslims believe it was actually Ishmael that Abraham had taken out to be executed, and Ishmael is the rightful inheritor of all that land. Ishmael's descendants end up becoming Muhammad and the Muslim religion. So Islam, Christianity, and Judaism all believe that they have been promised Israel, yet they can't agree on which group is the rightful heirs to it. That is the core problem to present day, is the belief that all three major religions believe that God promised them the Holy Land, which is Israel, and that the other ones are trying to steal it from you. It is a huge issue up to present day, and it is a fundamental belief system that causes a bunch of issues in these religions. So this is, I got two pictures here, randomly, of just different interpretations. This is supposed to be Isaac, about a 5-year-old boy, and God stopping him. And then Isaac, in this rendition, Isaac would be the one who inherits all the land. This is clearly a grown man. This would be Ishmael, because Ishmael would have been about 19 years old at the time. So in this rendition, the belief is that God stopped Abraham from killing Ishmael. So these two different versions of this story in the religious text are going to have fundamental consequences as far as the way these religious groups interact with each other, because both religious groups thinks the other group is wrong. When I say the two groups, Judaism and Christianity, even though they have had history for a long time as well, but Muslims also view between those two groups of the story of Abraham over who's the rightful heir here. So this was what was different about the followers of God of Abraham and the Buddhists and Hindus, how many gods they believe in. This is a pretty straightforward question. Make sure you answer it in complete sentences, but it's just asking about the differences in polytheism and monotheism that we had talked about yesterday. All right, so I'm going to try to quickly go through here and give you the backstory here of these three main monotheistic religions of how they developed. Judaism, Jewish people, this is by far the oldest monotheistic religion on earth, like by far. So the direct descendants of Isaac, all right, become the Jewish population. So Abraham is considered to be the first prophet in the land of Canaan, the Abraham that we've been talking about. First 5 books of the Jewish holy book are called the Torah. If you're Christian, this is part of the Old Testament with Genesis and Exodus and all that. Speaking of Exodus, now I would love to teach a class on just the stories in the Bible, because there are so many awesome, epic stories in the Bible. One of the most famous stories in the Bible is of Moses, who led the people from slavery and parted the Red Sea and then came out with the Ten Commandments. So Moses, God spoke directly to Moses, and then Moses spoke to the Jewish people, and they got the Ten Commandments, which fundamental in both Jewish religion and Christian religion. But so Moses becomes one of the most popular people in the Jewish religion. A lot of different civilizations took over Israel over the years. So because Israel was a great location for trading. So different groups would come and take it over, but whatever group would take over Israel would then themselves become Jewish. So when they went to take over another country, they were just actually spreading Judaism around. So Judaism was very, very, very common in the Middle East at the time. This is about 1,000 years before Jesus, right? This is just a picture of a drawing or painting of Moses and the Ten Commandments. The whole story of Moses is fantastic. All right, so what is so important about the Ten Commandments to the Jewish people? How did it make them feel closer to God? All right, so I didn't clarify this, so I'll talk about it now. God gave these commandments to Moses to give to the people. It's a set of rules, like thou shalt not kill, don't covet thy neighbor's ox. There's a lot of different rules in the Ten Commandments. It makes people feel closer to God because there's clearly a set of rules that these people are supposed to follow in order to get in God's good graces. So this type of communication with God helps people feel closer to God, and it is a pivotal part of the religion. All right, so Christianity, all right? So you have Judaism. Judaism existed for a really long time, and then there's going to be this guy named Jesus gets born. Now, with Moses, all right, it's really hard to validate that Moses existed. There's a ton of different stories, but it's all kind of a circular argument. Like, same thing with Abraham. They probably existed in some capacity. Whether it's the complete accurate story, it's hard to tell just because it was so long ago, and having written records from unbiased sources is hard to come by. Jesus, however, is a little different. Now, I'm not discounting Moses or anything like that, but Jesus is a different story. Jesus is a historical figure. Jesus is a real person. Now, as we'll go through and talk about Jesus, and Jesus claims to be the Son of God and performs miracles and stuff like that, some of that stuff can be subjective, all right? However, the fact that Jesus was a real person, really existed, really was executed on the cross, all of that is a verifiable fact because we have different source people who weren't followers of Jesus who wrote it down. The Roman people are the ones that executed him. So let me go through and explain to you Christianity that started with Jesus. So, Jesus is a guy that gets born in the Middle East in an area called Bethlehem. He basically, and afterwards, once he gets disciples, gets famous, the story of him and his mother, who was a virgin and all that, becomes more popular later on. We really don't see this Jesus guy is not really important during the time period until he's about 33 years old. He's going to show up one day and claim to be the Son of God. All right. Now, you show up and so he's Jewish. Everybody in the area is Jewish. He shows up and is like, "Hey, I'm the Son of God." Now, you better not make those claims unless you can find a way of backing it up. So he starts performing miracles, helping blind people see, healing people, providing. There's a lot of miracles in the Bible. It talks about stuff that he gets a devout following of people, all right? So he gets a group of disciples, all right, who follow him around, and he goes around and starts saying, "Hey, Judaism is good and all, but God's given me, there's some additional ways that we need to be doing things, some better ways of doing things." So he goes around and starts changing Judaism, all right? So he's clear to say, "Look, I'm not God. I'm just the Son of God. I'm here to, if you believe me, good things are going to happen." So he ends up getting very popular in Israel. All right. So here's what happens. Rome, the Roman military, had been taking over everything at the time. They'd been spreading out in the whole region, and when they show up to Israel, so Rome was relatively cool about letting people keep their own religion and not trying to force their religion on them. So Rome already knew they weren't going to show up into a Jewish country and force them to not be Jewish. So they were going to let them be Jewish. However, when they rolled up into Israel to take over Israel, they realized there was this guy there named Jesus and had such a huge following, and people followed Jesus so devoutly already. Rome was worried about this guy. Rome's like, if this guy tells the people in Israel not to follow Roman law, this is going to be bad. They're not going to follow Roman law. So what can we do? So what do? They basically have him executed. This is him being put on the cross, is him being executed by Rome. Now, if Rome just shows up and executes the most popular man in the country, not going to be very good for Rome. All right. So what they do instead is they show up and they find Jewish people who aren't real sure that Jesus is actually the Son of God. Like, this is kind of a crazy, they're like, I don't really know about that. And the Roman government is like, hey, you don't want that guy, do you? And they're like, nah, I don't know what to do. And the Roman government goes to Jesus's detractors, the Jewish people who don't necessarily believe him, and say, hey, we want you to try him, convict him of being a fake god, and we will go handle the execution. So Jesus is actually tried by Jewish people in Israel, but it's the Roman soldiers who are going to be the ones that carry out this execution. All right. So Jesus is executed. However, the story of Jesus just spreads rapidly. The same way Judaism had spread. People are following Jesus because there's a lot of different things that can be done under the Christian religion that weren't allowed under the Jewish religion. It's interesting, his disciples, after Jesus dies, and then the famous story of Easter that he comes back 3 days later, the story of Jesus gets spread around the country by his followers, and then around the region. A lot of them die horrible deaths as they're spreading the story, but it eventually catches on. Crazy enough, within about 100 years, Rome, the country who killed him, become devout Christians, and anybody in the Roman Empire was required to be Christian. So once the Roman Empire became Christian, they spread Christianity around the whole world, and very quickly Christianity is going to outnumber Judaism as the largest religion on earth. So make sure I got all this. This is a picture of obviously a painting of Jesus with his disciples. So like Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John. Now you're like, how did he find Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John, people with those names? Those are English translations of their much more Hebrew names. So Jesus is a real person. The guys that followed him are real people who have entire stories themselves after Jesus dies. So the question here is, why was the Roman government concerned with the amount of power that Jesus was gaining in Israel? And we had talked about that. And what was their solution? Like, what was Rome's solution to Jesus? All right. So after the death of Jesus, his message spread very, very fast. So what do I got here? All right, and so there's a little thing here talking about the 95 Theses of Martin Luther. We're going to talk about that in a few lessons from now. This shows all the pink area. So Rome is right here. It should not be this blurry. I don't like how blurry this map is. Bummer. But all the pink is the Roman Empire, which is the majority of the human population at the time in this region. So once Rome became Christian, it drastically spread Christianity because they then mandated everybody that they own or control has to be Christian. All right, and that is as far as we're going to get here in this part. So make sure you get 2 sentences for all that and then go to the next part of the lesson. See you guys tomorrow.